Welcome back, young entrepreneurs. I'm Tony.
And this is Akash. Today we have a young entrepreneur from Phoenix, Arizona on to speak. His name is Nicholas Liu, and he runs a company called Next Stories. He will be attending Boston University in the fall. We will go ahead and let him explain what Next Stories is here in a bit.
In this podcast, there will be three main takeaways.
Number one being what the mindset of a young entrepreneur is.
2, advice on how to conduct an interview.
And lastly, advice for hesitant entrepreneurs.
So stay tuned for this and more, but now we'll pass it on to Nick. Hey Nick, how's it going?
Good. It's doing pretty great.
So let's start with the questions. So Nick, tell us a little bit about yourself.
So, as you guys know, I'm from Phoenix, Arizona, and it tends to get very hot here. Well, since I was very little, I've been very interested in filmmaking, and just it started out with me kind of, getting videos of like remote control cars or like getting videos of makeshift like tiny boats, and then I would make them into little movies or like make little skits with friends. And so that's how my love of film really started. And it's developed into, Next Stories, and I have another YouTube channel that I do other kinds of stuff. But yeah, I think film has really defined me throughout my life, and so has entrepreneurship.
So before we get into what Next Stories is, you mentioned you had another YouTube channel. What do you post on there?
Yeah, so on the other YouTube channel, I post exclusively like drone footage with my Mavic, and it's just a highlight reel, and I like to add some music and some color grading into there to just make it a cinematic experience. I guess that's really the point of that channel. It's to really immerse you in these places, and like I go to different places that people haven't really heard of around the world.
Right.
And I just really like to showcase it with this drone footage. But yeah, if you guys want to check it out, it's just Nicholas Liu on YouTube.
Cool. Next Stories. What exactly is it, and what's the mission behind it?
Yeah. So Next Stories it's basically a series of videos focused and centered around, a certain individual. I interview people, across the Phoenix Valley, and, sometimes even across like the nation. And they share their life stories and their core values. And the mission behind Next Stories is to really bring people together and kind of connect individuals with each other. With these perspectives, I think that people can gain a lot of knowledge and add to their own perspective with these other people's life stories and core beliefs. I think that it adds a level of, it really adds sort of a new worldview or a new outlook on life that you maybe have never heard of or probably have never. And so that's what I really like to do with Next Stories. I really like to showcase unique perspectives and, unique life stories.
Yeah, that's really cool. So before we go to the next question, so when you're finding these people to interview, how do you go about that?
Yeah, so I reach out. I reach out to a lot of people, a lot of friends, a lot of, I have certain connections, and I reach out to my friends or like, family, or even people, I know people at my school, my classmates, and I ask, do you know anyone who would be interesting to interview? And a lot of people also, like a lot of these people I've interviewed, some of them I just came upon by chance, like Moises Arias, for example. I just saw him on the beach, and I said, hey, would you want to do a quick interview? And he said, yeah, sure. So, it was, very impromptu. Some people I just find on the spot. Others, I contact in advance. Others are people that I've encountered in the past. I go to a lot of, different events. And I did also when I was younger. So that's how I encountered all these interesting people. And yeah.
That's cool.
That's pretty impressive that you do some of the interviews on the spot.
Yeah.
Nick, why did you start Next Stories?
Yeah, so I started Next Stories, as I said a little bit earlier. I started it because a lot of people. What I've noticed is, a lot of people, especially in politics. I don't really want to get political or anything, but I'm just commenting on the fact that so many people, argue and blindly, and they just argue and argue and argue. And I know a lot of people, when they talk or when they argue, they don't really listen to the other person's perspective, or they don't listen to other people's perspectives. I think that it's our nature to kind of not really listen to other people's perspectives and kind of prioritize our own. And I think that's fine, but I think that people also have to listen to other people's views, and to make people understand each other, they need more information. So that is why I created Next Stories. I created Next Stories not only to showcase these interesting people's lives, but to also really have other people understand where another person is coming from, so that in the future, maybe, if they're talking to someone else, they're encouraged. They want to listen to what the other person has to say, and then make up their own conclusions after that.
Right.
It's a pretty cool perspective.
So Next Stories obviously was the outcome of your love of entrepreneurship. So how did you start off getting into entrepreneurship in the first place?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So basically, when I was very little, I was just interested in so many things. I mean, I wanted to be an astronaut. I was interested in film, as I said earlier. I was just interested in so many things like art, the medical field, business. And I was thinking to myself, is there some way that I can combine all these three interests, or all of these interests together? And I didn't know about entrepreneurship until recently, but that was the perfect solution. I mean, you're combining so many different skill sets and so many different interests into one occupation. It's a lifestyle, really. That's how I think about it.
Yeah.
And yeah.
That's a really good way to think about entrepreneurship. I think that's basically sums up for any of you listeners who didn't know. I think that's a really good summarizer for what entrepreneurship is.
Well said. So, although Next Stories is new, you have conducted quite a number of interviews so far. So, was there any interview in particular that stood out to you?
Yeah, well, honestly, I think that all of the interviews that I've done, they each have their own kind of special flair to them. I don't know if any one in particular stands out to me, because they're all so unique. And I think that is the point of Next Stories, is to have each one kind of stand out on its own, in a different way. For example, I interviewed this one person. His name is David Dodge, and he is one of the descendants of the founders of the Dodge Motor Company, so the car company. And he was also one of the pupils of a world-renowned architect, Frank Lloyd Wright. And his life story is just so interesting. I mean, if you see the video, he built this house all by himself. He designed it and built it by himself. And it's just so interesting that nobody knows who he is. And I think that, with this video, it kind of showcases his artistic ability and his unique view, because not everybody you meet is a descendant of a Dodge Motor Company,
Right.
and a student of one of the most famous architects around the world.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
So I actually had a question about that particular interview with Mr. Dodge. In the intro, we could see some of your incredible drone shots. That this house is beautiful. So honestly, what was it like going out there, seeing this like for yourself, because it kind of looked like it was out in the middle of nowhere. Not many people probably have seen this, I would think. So what was it like seeing it?
Yeah, it's pretty crazy. So, I mean, the way to get there, it's not even like a regular road, it's a dirt path. That's how you get there. So, I'd imagine very little people go there.
Yeah.
But it was breathtaking. I mean, it was amazing seeing all this amazing architecture. It's like nothing I've ever seen before. It's not like your typical living room.
Yeah, no.
He has like a huge living room with like a balcony on the left, and like he has so many sculptures, and he has a special room with. You can see a little bit of it in the video, but there's like there's a statue of Romeo and Juliet, and what he did. This is very interesting. He made like the statues move ever so slowly. Like you can't even notice. If you look at it, you won't even notice. And it just moves. It rotates really, really slowly,
Wow.
depending on the light. And I just thought, oh my gosh, it's amazing. There are a lot of things you don't really pick up on. Like there's so many different details, and some of them practical, some of them, very visual, aesthetic. And I just think it's so beautiful and it's so intricate.
Yeah, when I watched a video in particular, it kind of blew me away because I'd never seen such architecture, especially out there in the middle of nowhere.
It's really amazing.
So when we watched your videos on YouTube, one thing stood out to us. You didn't talk in any of your interviews. Was there a purpose behind this?
Yeah, so the main purpose behind it was because as much as it would be awesome to have myself in the video, I didn't really want to take away from these people's stories. I just like to keep the focus on the person, the focal point of the video, like the main star, if you will.
Right.
Cool. So Nick, an important part of our podcast is doing interviews. So is there any advice you can give to us that you've gained when doing interviews of fewer people on Next Stories?
Yeah, so always double check your gear. Always double check, like, no matter how tedious, this sounds super tedious, but it's very important. You have to double check your gear and double check that everything is right. Like, do an audio check, do a visual check, because that'll help you in the long run. Like, I have this story. So, once I was doing a video, and, I was literally talking for 21 minutes to this person. And when I left, I played the video, and there was no audio. No audio at all. And I remember I was so upset. But thankfully, I had recorded this other segment that didn't, the audio wasn't erased, or there was audio. And so thankfully I could use that. But I mean, imagine you at that moment realizing all you did was for nothing. Like, that is a terrible feeling. And the feeling, like, if I hadn't had that tiny bit of audio, I would have had to call the person again and redo the interview. And that is a huge pain for the person who's doing the interview, because they're spending their own time, to try to talk to you. Also, another thing is, be courteous to the person that you're interviewing, because they are using their own time to kind of help you out and to do this interview. And so I think that's very important. You have to treat them, especially like the people that I've interviewed, you have to be very respectful to them. And I think that's also key. It's very important, because it also affects how they answer your questions. But yeah.
Right.
Thanks for the advice.
Mm-hmm.
So, do you want to move on to the side questions now?
Yeah, that works. Are there any entrepreneurship lessons that you have learned that have proved invaluable to you?
Yeah, I'm gonna give you guys some advice. So for entrepreneurship, I think that one of the key things about being an entrepreneur um, is knowing how to work with a team. That is very important. And I think the most essential thing about working with a team is making sure, even before you start, I think it's important that everybody on your team is, you know, you guys see each other as the same, or you guys respect each other equally. Because as it may not sound like a huge problem, but as you progress, that could mean the end of your team. Um, and I'm not just saying this because it's good to be respectful and nice to people. I'm saying like it is a critical, um, it's a critical part to your team. You have to keep. That's how you keep your team together. If someone isn't feeling good on your team, um, then that could mean like half of your team would be gone. And so it's really important to have a good team dynamic. And I think also being open with your team members, that's another huge thing. Um, because I've seen many cases, and I've been on many teams where um, like the owner, or like the team lead, if you will, they've hidden a lot of things from us, and they didn't tell us anything. And I think that hurt the team as a result. And some of these startups didn't even continue; they just stopped right there. So I think that is a very, very important piece of advice. Another thing, I don't know if you guys have heard this before, but at our kind of program, there's this phrase, fail fast. And I think that's important. Your first startup isn't always gonna, I mean, it's rarely going to be successful. Like,
Right.
but you learn from it. And then as you go on to your second or your third startup, that's when everything gets put into place. You finally get a successful working startup. So I think it's important for people to realize it's okay to fail, but you have to learn from your mistakes. You can't just keep doing the same thing over and over again, obviously. But it's not a bad thing to fail. You can always learn from your mistakes, and that's how people make better businesses. I mean, most of the CEOs out there, their first venture failed, but they persevered. And that is another really important piece of advice for young entrepreneurs.
Yeah. By the way, the program that Nick mentioned was, if you remember in the first episode, how I mentioned I did a high school entrepreneurship program called Quarter Zero. That was the program that Nick was referring to.
If you have anything else to say, before we wrap it up, I have one more question. If there was one thing you could say to someone considering building something, but they weren't sure, what would you say to them?
I would say do it. I mean, obviously you have to plan it out a little bit. I would say don't just blindly do something. But I think that if you have the passion and if you have the drive to do something, why not?
Yeah, I agree.
All right, Nick, we want to thank you so much for coming on the podcast. It means a lot to us.
Yep.
Yeah. I really appreciated being on the podcast, and I wish you guys good luck.
Thanks.
Yep, thanks so much, Nick. So before you go, actually, Nick, you want to shout out your YouTube, your Instagram, any of it?
Yeah, sure. So my YouTube, you can find me at just search up Nicholas Liu with a CH. Or I also have another channel, which is Next Stories, which is basically the series of interviews. Or if you want, you can find my videos on Next Stories online at nextstories.org. And You can find me on Instagram at nicholas.lu.
All right. Thank you so much, Nick.
Yeah.
That was Inside the Mind of Nicholas Liu. I really hope you guys enjoyed. He gave us a lot of great insight of a young entrepreneur's mind, someone just like yourself. Next week, we'll be stepping away from the interviews to give a little lesson of our own.
Make sure to follow us on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook at Young Entrepreneurs. This is Akash.
This is Tony.
See you guys next time.